I figured my wife, Laura, would be thrilled when I told her I unexpectedly had the entire week off from work. I am a mechanic who works on heavy equipment, which means I usually put in a lot of hours. Laura had a 3-day getaway planned with her sisters to Lake Vinola, where they typically rent cabins, enjoy swimming, hiking, and wind down around the campfire. Initially, I had let her know I could not make it this year because of work, and she seemed to understand. Midweek is prime time for overtime pay, and I rarely make it to these trips. But this time, I got lucky with some free time. "Hey, honey. Great news. I can join you guys at the lake this time," I announced, feeling genuinely happy. "That is wonderful, Ryan. I am sure the kids will be thrilled, and it will be nice for you to relax a little too," Laura replied, smiling. "By the way, what do you think about bringing your dirt bike? There are trails around there, and it could be fun for you to explore." I asked cautiously, "Would that be okay with you? I do not want it to cause any problems." "Of course, enjoy yourself," she reassured me while stirring something on the stove. Excited, I went outside to prepare the bike. Technically, it is a street-legal 2-stroke bike that I could take off-road as long as I did not go overboard. I rarely get a chance to ride it, so this was perfect. When dinner was ready, we all sat down as a family. Laura and I have been married for 12 years, and we have 3 great kids, Mia, who is 11, Jake, 8, and little Tommy, 7. We live in a cozy little house that comes with a hefty mortgage, but life has been good to the Connors. After dinner, while the kids settled down to watch television, I grabbed a shower. Laura was at her computer finishing up some work, and as I walked into the room, I saw her quickly close something on the screen and log off. Pretending not to notice, I rummaged around in the closet for my trail maps. She smiled casually before leaving the room. Curiosity got the better of me. Once I made sure she was downstairs doing laundry, I reopened the computer and checked her email. Normally, Laura is meticulous about clearing her inbox and deleting messages. But this time, she had been in a rush and forgot to clear her deleted folder. That is when I saw it, a message that froze me in my tracks. The email read: "Change in plans. Ryan is coming to the lake with the family. You can still come, but Karen will set you up in the last cabin. We should have plenty of time together since he'll be riding his bike most of the time. See you soon. L." The email was addressed to someone named D. Thompson at a generic email provider. My stomach churned. Who the hell was D. Thompson, and why was he coming to our family vacation? My mind reeled as I pieced things together. Laura's sister, Karen, was apparently part of this arrangement, and that only deepened the betrayal. Feeling unsettled, I grabbed Laura's high school yearbook. It did not take long to find Don Thompson's picture. There was even a prom photo of him with Laura. I started questioning everything. Why had she married me if she still had feelings for this guy? Was I just convenient? I have always worked hard to provide for my family and never questioned my sacrifices. I adore my kids, even though I was never a big fan of children before having my own. They are my world, and I would do anything to protect them. This weekend was shaping up to be far more than I had bargained for. At the lake, things were in full swing. The kids were quick to jump into the water, and I found myself unloading the bike and the rest of the gear. Laura's sisters were already there, Karen with her 4 kids and Cora, who was divorced, with her 3 little ones. Karen's husband was not able to make it, so I felt like the odd man out. That is, until I saw the dark green SUV parked near the last cabin. A Dodge Durango. The pieces were falling into place. After lunch, I announced I was going out for a ride. I made a show of revving up the noisy bike, knowing Laura would hear it. I rode out about 4 miles, let the engine idle for a bit, then turned it off. Quietly, I walked back toward the cabins, sticking to the trees. I saw Laura sitting at a picnic table with her sisters, but my eyes were scanning for someone else. Sure enough, a tall, good-looking man emerged and joined them. The sisters greeted him warmly, confirming my worst fears. He chatted with them for a while before heading off toward the changing rooms. I trailed him from a distance. Moments later, Laura followed. I felt like a spy in my own life. They both slipped into the changing rooms, Laura on the women's side, Dawn through a side entrance. My gut twisted, but I had to know the truth. Quietly, I entered the opposite side with my camera rolling, lens cap on. I pressed against the adjoining wall and listened. "I am sorry, Dawn," Laura said in a hushed voice. "I did not know Ryan would be coming this weekend. I will try to make it up to you. He will be off on the bike most of the time, so we just have to keep an eye on the kids." "It is okay, Laura. I am disappointed, but I am sure we will still have a good time," Dawn replied. They began planning to meet later that night, but it was clear they could not wait. I heard zippers, rustling clothes, and Dawn letting out a low moan. The sounds of what came next hit me like a punch to the stomach. Laura giggled and said, "There, that should hold you until tonight." I sat frozen in disbelief. My heart shattered, but what had I expected? I had set out to catch her, and I did. Still, hearing it was a whole different kind of pain. I stayed hidden until they left. Then, with my head spinning, I walked back to the bike, revved it up, and rode hard into the mountains. I had always been the kind of person to avoid confrontation, and for over 12 years, I truly believed I had a solid marriage. But now, it seemed like I had just been a convenient provider for my wife and kids, a necessary piece in their lives but nothing more. That afternoon, I decided to scout the area around the beach. There was a long grassy slope leading down to the water's edge. The beach itself was narrow, flanked by rocks and woods. In the center, about 50 feet from the water, stood a fire pit. Laura, along with her sisters Kathy and Cora, had taken the kids on a hike to see a nearby waterfall. I took the opportunity to prepare the fire pit for later. I collected and arranged wood, placing dry kindling at the bottom and stacking sturdy logs on top. I even found some cardboard, which I layered for easier lighting. There were not many other people around, so I worked unnoticed. Dawn was nowhere in sight. By the time everyone returned from their hike, I had enlisted Jake and Tommy to help gather about 20 sturdy sticks for roasting marshmallows. I told them to keep it a secret, which had them giggling with excitement. Mia was in charge of the marshmallows, and I gave her 2 oversized bags, explaining our plan for the evening. As the sun set, we all gathered near the picnic area for a meal. The kids were starting to wind down for the night, and the adults were chatting. Kathy seemed unusually talkative and stayed close to me, constantly asking for help with little things. Meanwhile, I kept a discreet eye on Laura, trying not to be obvious. After the sky turned dark, a debate started about how we should spend the rest of the evening. Ghost stories seemed to be winning, but then I noticed Laura had slipped away. Kathy, still hovering, launched into a detailed explanation about her husband George remodeling their kitchen, but my mind was elsewhere. I excused myself, saying I needed to grab the video camera from our cabin. Kathy did not seem to mind, probably assuming I was heading in the opposite direction from the lake. Instead, I grabbed 2 cans of charcoal lighter fluid and a box of wooden matches. Using the cover of darkness, I made my way behind the cabins and down to the beach. There was just enough moonlight to guide me without tripping. As I got closer, I could make out 2 figures in the water. On the grassy patch near the shoreline, I spotted a blanket. On it lay Laura and Dawn's clothes, including their underwear, alongside 2 towels. Quietly, I picked up the blanket, careful to gather all the corners so nothing fell out, and carried it to the fire pit. I poured 1 full can of lighter fluid over the wood, placed the blanket on top, and emptied the second can for good measure. Striking a match, I tossed it onto the pile and stepped back just in time to avoid the burst of flames. Unfortunately, I still managed to singe my eyebrows and the hair on one arm. The fire roared to life, and Mia and Jake sprang into action, yelling, marshmallow roast. Everybody to the bonfire. The kids came running down the hill, excited to roast marshmallows. From the corner of my eye, I noticed Laura and Dawn in the water. The fire's glow reflected in their shocked eyes as they watched the scene unfold. Kathy stood frozen at the top of the hill, her face pale. Meanwhile, Jake handed out sticks, and Mia distributed marshmallows to the kids, who eagerly crowded around the flames. Laura tried to stay hidden near the dock, but I walked over calmly. Her lover was struggling to process the situation. I greeted him with mock politeness. "Hello there, Dawn. I'm Ryan, Laura's husband. Nice to finally meet you." He stammered, unable to respond. I turned to Laura and asked, "Need help getting up the ladder so you can join the kids by the fire?" Her face twisted with anger and panic. "No, Ryan, just go get the blanket and towels," she snapped. "Oh, sorry, sweetheart," I replied, feigning innocence. "Afraid I used those to start this lovely fire. It's warm, though, isn't it?" "No, Ryan, no. Why would you do that?" she shrieked. "How are we supposed to get out of the water?" "I'm sure Kathy will be more than happy to help you," I said coolly. "As for me, I'm leaving." On my way out, I grabbed my jacket and a videotape from the cabin. Then, with a valve stem tool from my dirt bike kit, I deflated all 4 tires on Laura's SUV, making sure she could not drive off until the morning. I attempted to sabotage Dawn's Dodge Durango by breaking the petcock, but it took a few hard hits to get the job done. I also grabbed his vehicle registration from the glove box before leaving the campsite on my dirt bike. The ride was long and uncomfortable, especially on an old 2-stroke bike, but the empty roads at night made it bearable. About 10 miles down the highway, I spotted Dawn's Durango pulled over, white vapors rising from under the hood. He was leaning into the engine, trying to figure out the issue. I sped past unnoticed, heading for the next gas station. After refueling, I pulled out his registration. Dawn lived in Pottsville, a town I could reach in less than an hour. Once there, I found his modest house and broke a kitchen window to let myself in. His computer was set up in the bedroom, so I removed the hard drive and grabbed a binder of CDs sitting on the desk. Then I left, taking a detour home that required another fuel stop. By the time I got back to my place, it was well past midnight. I packed my personal belongings into my truck's king cab, clothes, documents, and my computer, and checked into a motel on the other side of town. It was almost 3 in the morning, and I felt like I was just getting started. I needed to grab a quick shower, knowing that the following day was going to be packed. Even though I was exhausted, I still managed to wake up at the crack of dawn. It took me some time to dig into Dawn's hard drive, but I eventually cracked it. Dawn had saved nearly all the emails he and Laura had exchanged. Most were neatly stored in his documents folder, though quite a few were still in his email inbox. There were so many that reading them all would have taken me an entire day. Instead, I skimmed a few to get a general sense of what had been going on. It was clear they had been having an affair, but the emails were not vulgar or degrading. Surprisingly, I did not find a single instance where they spoke poorly about me. Quite the opposite, in fact. Laura had mentioned the excellent job I did installing the new kitchen cabinets, and Dawn replied that he wished he were as skilled as I was. It was bizarre, 2 people betraying me, yet not trash-talking me in any way. It left me more bewildered than anything else. The CDs I found told another perplexing story. There was no explicit material, just pictures of them together, doing all kinds of things. In one set of photos, Laura's hair was short and dark, which must have been around the time she was pregnant with Mia. Another set showed her hair dyed auburn, likely during her pregnancy with Jake. The last set had her with long dark hair when she was carrying Tommy. In every single photo, Dawn was grinning like a proud father. That hit me hard. It was time to move on with my day. First, I made my rounds. I closed out all our bank accounts and cancelled the credit cards. Then I quit my job, collected my vacation pay, and cashed out my life insurance policies. I also canceled our cell phone plans and arranged to have the utilities shut off by the end of the week. I was bound to forget something, but I did my best to cover my bases. I made a stop at the family doctor's office, where a nurse swabbed my cheek for a DNA test. I instructed her to send the results directly to my lawyer. Afterward, I visited my attorney, Mr. Seymour, and filed for divorce. I told him to leave Laura with nothing except for a small amount of child support if, and only if, the DNA tests proved I was the biological father of the kids. My hope was thin. I left $2,000 in our joint checking account for Laura and the children. She could keep the house, but only if she managed to make the payments herself. I also signed 2 power of attorney forms, one for selling the house if needed and another for any legal matters Seymour might handle on my behalf. Leaving Reading, where we lived, was no small thing. Yuba City was far away, and while I had enough money saved to live comfortably for a while, I knew I would need to start working soon to avoid going stir-crazy. I suspected I had left behind a trail of unfinished business, like breaking into Don's house, but I could not muster the energy to care. Living under the radar was not exactly my strong suit. My car registration, driver's license, and insurance were all still valid for the time being, but eventually, I would have to update them and risk exposing myself. Getting paid under the table was my only option. At dawn, groups of men looking for work would gather on key street corners. Potential employers would drive up, pick their workers, and pay them cash at the end of the day. No paperwork, no questions. I joined the day labor crowd and eventually started picking up some Spanish to communicate better. After a while, I became a regular worker for the Southern Nut Growers Company. They grew almonds, walnuts, pistachios, and hazelnuts. The work was backbreaking but straightforward, and it left me so exhausted that I could sleep soundly at night. One day, about a month into this new routine, I borrowed a supervisor's phone and called my lawyer. He informed me that Laura had been served with divorce papers. She did not contest the divorce but was requesting child support. However, she had not provided any DNA results. I reiterated my stance: no support unless the kids were proven to be mine. Her parents and sisters were helping her cover expenses while she looked for a job. She had even listed the house for sale. If everything went smoothly, the divorce would be finalized in 4 months. Don Thompson never filed a report with the Shill County Police about the break-in. With that worry off my plate, I began to relax a little. In the evenings, I went through more of Don's emails and the photo albums. One set of pictures from about 4 years ago stood out. Laura and her sister Kathy had taken a weekend cruise to Nassau. Laura spent the entire trip with Don, while Kathy had been with a man named Richard Witt, not her husband, George. From the pictures, it was obvious that Laura and Don shared a cabin. The betrayal cut me deeply, making me question how I could have been so blind. One morning, at Southern Nut Growers, both of the company's large tree shakers broke down. The company called a mechanic from Sacramento, but I offered to take a look while we waited. Within an hour, I had the first machine running, earning cheers from my coworkers. I spent the rest of the day fixing the second shaker, finally finishing around 7 in the evening. The foreman, John, was so impressed that he offered me a full-time job as an equipment repairman on the spot, which I eagerly accepted. A month later, I came home from work to find a budget rental car parked in my driveway. George, Kathy's husband, was sitting on my porch with a faint smile. I was not thrilled to see him, but I kept it civil. "How long have you been waiting, George?" I asked. "About 2 hours," he replied. "I could use a cold beer, if you've got one." I grabbed 2 cans of Foster's from the fridge, and George and I sat down across from each other at the laminate kitchen table. I couldn't help but wonder what could be so urgent that he flew nearly 3,000 miles to see me. "So, George, what brings you all the way out here?" I asked, taking a swig of my beer. Lisa asked me to come, and her parents covered the plane tickets, George began, fiddling with the edge of the table. Alright, let's dive in. First, let me tell you something not many people know about Kathy and me. Does this involve Richard Witt? I interrupted. George sighed. Guess it wasn't as much of a secret as we thought, he admitted. I just gave a small, knowing smile, letting him continue. Bob, all three Spencer girls, Lisa, Kathy, and Cora, dreamed of having big families. It was something their parents instilled in them, too. Kathy and I were married for over 2 years without any luck conceiving. After some tests, we found out the issue was on my end. I can't have kids. Adoption wasn't something we wanted, and we couldn't afford fertility treatments. After a lot of difficult conversations, we decided to find someone else to help Kathy get pregnant. It sounds crazy, I know, but we gave it a lot of thought. Richard was a good friend from high school, and Kathy had dated him before meeting me. He even stood as an usher at our wedding. I liked him and trusted him, so Kathy and I explained our situation. He was reluctant at first but eventually agreed, with conditions. Conditions? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Richard said he'd help Kathy conceive as many children as we wanted, but he had terms. Once a month, he'd have a night with Kathy, and he wanted 1 weekend a year with her. He agreed to stop once he got married. That's how we had all 4 of our kids. 3 years ago, I was the best man at Richard's wedding, and he hasn't seen Kathy since. I leaned back, trying to process this information. And how exactly does this relate to Lisa and me? It's a similar situation, but not quite the same, George said carefully. Lisa and Don Thompson were high school sweethearts. They planned their whole future together until Don had a water skiing accident right after graduation. It left him unable to have kids, though he could still, be intimate. Having children was Lisa's biggest dream, and Don convinced her to marry someone else so she could have a family while staying close to him. Close as in? Yeah, Bob, George admitted reluctantly. They stayed involved. But it wasn't just that. Don actually helped Lisa find someone to marry, someone who'd give her the family she wanted. He wanted it to be someone outside their hometown, so he reached out to an old friend in Reading. That's when Lisa met you. I clenched my fists under the table, keeping my voice calm. So, you're telling me I was handpicked for this role? Not quite like that, George insisted. Lisa genuinely fell for you. She pursued you because she believed you'd be a good husband and father. And she was right, she gave you a good home and 3 beautiful kids. Over the years, she grew closer to you and started seeing Don less and less. She even tried setting him up with other women, but Don never stopped loving her. George reached into his pocket and slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a letter from a lab, titled Schill Scientific Labs. It was not the official form I had expected, just a letter stating that I was the biological father of all 3 children. I read the letter and then looked back at George. He remained silent, waiting for a response. That's it? I asked flatly. Well, Lisa cut ties with Don after you left, George continued. She decided it was best for her and the kids. She's hoping that without Don in the picture, you'll reconsider the divorce and come back home. I got up and grabbed 2 more beers, handing one to George as I sat back down. I stared at the letter in disbelief. This man flew across the country to feed me this story, which might have contained some truth, but it was impossible to tell. What time's your flight, George? I asked, breaking the silence. I need to be at Sacramento Airport by 8, he replied. All right, you'll just have enough time to return the rental car. I appreciate you coming all the way out here, but you probably could have said all this over the phone. Anything you want me to tell Lisa or the kids? She's hoping for good news, Bob. She's really heartbroken about you leaving, George said, his voice heavy with emotion. I'll think about it, I replied, walking him out to the car. He seemed disappointed by my lack of reaction, but I had too many questions and too few answers to make any decisions right then and there. The next morning, I called my lawyer. "Seymour here. What can I do for you, Bob?" "First off, did you ever get the DNA test results back?" "Not a thing," Seymour said. "I've asked Lisa 3 separate times, and each time she promised, but nothing came of it. I even offered to pay for it, but it didn't seem to matter." I explained the letter George had given me. "Bob, unless they ran their own test using samples from you, I have no idea how they'd have a match. I still have your results here at my office and haven't released them to anyone. Can you look into a guy named Don Thompson in Pottsville for me?" I asked. "I have a feeling knowing more about him might be important." "I'll see what I can find, but the divorce is nearly final," Seymour reminded me. I grabbed 2 cold beers, handed one to George, and we sat down at the old laminate kitchen table. His trip had been unexpected, and I had to admit, I was curious about why he flew nearly 3,000 miles just to talk to me. "So, George, what's so important that you had to come all this way?" I asked, taking a sip of my drink. "Lisa asked me to," he said bluntly. "Her parents covered the plane tickets. She felt this was something that needed to be said in person." I nodded, leaning back in my chair. "All right. So, what is it?" George hesitated before answering. "First, let me ask, do I owe you anything for your help or trouble?" "No, you're good," I replied. "Now, get to the point." He sighed and began his story. "Lisa thought it would be best if the kids were with you for now. Since you didn't want to come back to Pennsylvania, she decided to bring them out here to California. She's already rented a place across the river in Marysville. Figured it'd be easier this way." It took me a second to process. "Okay, what's the plan then? How about I order some pizza, and we can figure things out over dinner?" George suggested. The kids were thrilled to see me. Mia, Jake, and Tommy ran up to the truck the moment I pulled in, excitedly talking over one another about their cross-country road trip. Their energy was infectious, and I couldn't help but smile as I listened to their stories. Lisa, on the other hand, was quieter, letting the kids dominate the conversation while she stayed in the background. After dinner, as the kids settled in to watch television, Lisa and I cleaned up the remains of our haphazard meal. "I'm sorry, Bob," she said softly, breaking the silence. "I know I screwed up, and I'm not proud of it. George probably didn't explain things very well, but I ended everything with Don the day you left. I should have done it years ago, but I was too scared to let go of something that had been part of my life for so long. But I know now that you and the kids are what matter most to me. I want to fix this, Bob. I want us to be a family again." Her words hung in the air. I didn't know what to say. "Lisa, I don't know. There's a lot I still don't understand, and maybe I don't want to. I'm glad the kids are here, and I'll do my part for them, but I'm not sure I'm ready for anything else right now." "I understand," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I just hope we can work towards something better. I've got a job lined up at a restaurant in Marysville. I'll be working evenings and weekends, so I'll need help watching the kids." "That's fine," I agreed. "Do you want to drop them off here, or should I pick them up?" "I'll drop them off and pick them up after my shifts," she said. The arrangement worked well enough. On the first day, after she dropped off the kids, I swabbed their cheeks and sent the samples to Seymour. I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Meanwhile, Mia, now more talkative than usual, seemed curious about the tension between Lisa and me. I tried my best to shield the kids from the details of our messy situation, but it wasn't easy. One afternoon, a letter arrived from George. Inside was a newspaper clipping and a note that simply read, FYI. The clipping showed Don Thompson in a soldier's uniform. According to the article, he had completed basic training and was being deployed to Bosnia for 2 years. I called Mia over. "Do you know this man?" I asked, pointing to the photo. Sure, that's Uncle Don, she replied innocently. But we're not supposed to talk about him. Mom would get mad. Did you see him a lot? I pressed gently. Not a lot, but sometimes. Mom and he would talk while we played at Chuck E. Cheese or places like that. Once, he stayed over at the house before he joined the army. My chest tightened. What happened that night? Well, Mia said hesitantly, he came in a cab and told Mom he was leaving the next day for Philadelphia. She cried a lot while they talked. We went to bed, but I came downstairs in the middle of the night for a drink, and he wasn't on the couch anymore. The next morning, I saw him getting into a cab, and Mom was still crying. Later that day, she told us we were moving to California to see you. Did your mom cry when I left? I asked. No, Mia said quietly. Her words stung. Everything was starting to make sense now, though not in the way George or Lisa probably intended. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been fed half-truths from both of them. I wanted answers, but I wasn't sure I had the strength to confront them head-on. A few days later, I found myself sitting in the Seattle airport when my phone rang. Dad? It's Mia. Where are you? I'm in Seattle, honey. When are you coming home? She asked. Not for a while, I replied. I've signed a contract that'll keep me busy for about 10 months. I'm sorry if I got you into trouble with your mom. She's mad at me for talking about Uncle Don. We're leaving for Reading as soon as she gets her final paycheck from the restaurant. I think she's mad at you too, Mia said softly. I'm sorry, sweetie. Just remember that none of this is your fault. I love you, Jake, and Tommy. Always remember that, I said, my voice cracking. I'm going to miss you. After we hung up, I called Seymour. He confirmed what I had feared. The DNA tests showed none of the children were biologically mine. George and Lisa's claims had been yet another lie. The divorce would be final in 2 weeks. I'll continue sending money for the kids as long as there's no trouble, I told Seymour. He agreed to handle it. Now, here I am, sitting in the freezing cold of Prudhoe Bay, Alaska. At least the knife wound in my back is starting to heal. That's the end of this story. If you found it engaging, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more stories like this.
What do you think about this story? Write in comments. If you don't follow our channel Cheating Room, you will probably never hear from us again. If you are subscribed, congratulations, you will not miss any exciting story. Thank you for listening to this shocking story with us. See you again.
Bye bye.